So we've set up our document and set up this artboard here called main screen. And now we're ready to actually start drawing on it. Now before we start drawing, I want to do some editing to the toolbar up top because I sort of like having more tools available. So I'm going to right click here and go to Customize Toolbar. And I'm going to make a group by putting in a flexible space here. And in between these two spaces, I'm just going to put my rectangle, oval. These are all the things I'm going to use all the time. Lines I'll be using. Arrows probably not so much. Rounded absolutely. Triangles probably not so much. And let's see here. I like the text being along with all of those. Then over on the right hand side, I'm going to add some controls as well. So we have sort of view and artboard. Well, I'm going to add show and hide pixels to that. I'm going to go ahead and add show and hide grid to that as well. I'll use that quite a bit. I'm going to move vector and shape over so that they're sort of sitting pretty, and I like my export all the way on the left. It just feels like a save menu to me, which is why I like to have it there. So you can see already a bunch of different changes that I've made to the interface, and I'm going to go ahead and put the insert palette over here too, because that feels like sort of a file operation. But I suggest you tweak this and make it whatever's comfortable for you. I do show the icon and text, and I uncheck use small size because, hey, if you got the screen real estate, you might as well see the nice big icons. The last thing, I'll take tools and squeeze that in. And tools does a bunch of these other things that are hidden right now. So now that I have all these at my disposal, all these tools, it's time to start drawing some stuff. So why don't we start off with a button, pretty basic. I'm going to zoom in with Command plus, and minus. Do your zooming in. You can see it's a smooth zoom in. So a little weird at first, but you sort of get used to it. And we'll start with a rounded rectangle. Now, in Illustrator, I wouldn't have started with a rounded rectangle because it's hard for me to specify the size if I want to resize a rounded rectangle. Not the case with Sketch, which is cool and a little bit different. So I'll use my click and drag around with spacebar held down, find a good position, click on rounded, and just start drawing. And you'll notice if you draw it and you move your mouse very slowly, it'll sort of snap to the grid lines, which is nice. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull this here. And you'll notice Illustrator would have distorted these edges unless I used a filter effect, but Sketch is dealing with this just fine. Also, Photoshop would have distorted these edges. Sketch is dealing with it fine. Now, I'll do a lot of praising of some of the things that Sketch does, because I do feel like it's a great web design tool, and it's especially great when you consider its price in comparison to anything you could buy from the Adobe suite. It's a $50 program as opposed to the hundreds of dollars you would spend on Photoshop. But for everything it does well, there's obviously some stuff that it hasn't done well yet. I'm sure the creators are working on it. Fingers crossed they are. And as the community grows and more people learn it and get up to speed and start to like it and put pressure on the company, like you guys, now that you're learning it, the more they can sort of change and update things. And I don't necessarily think they need to make it more like Adobe, but they certainly need to enable certain features to make things easier. But anyway, that was a big rant. We have a rounded rectangle. So now over here in our inspector, we're seeing a whole bunch of properties. The first of which is radius. And this maps straight to CSS attributes, specifically border radius. So all these numbers are in pixels, so I'll go ahead and drag this, and you can see I can control the roundness of this button. Okay, cool, 11 looks good. We have our basic blending modes, a la Photoshop or Illustrator, right? Nothing too fancy there. Position I won't worry about. Size, very even thanks to the grid. It snapped to some pretty even values, but you can see it's pretty easy what it'll do is stop you with a red line here when you're hitting your original size that it was. Snap, snap, snap. That might even be snapping me to the center of the document. So some quirks that I myself aren't even used to. Now we have this sort of fill section, and you can add multiple fills. We'll get into that a little bit, but it's essentially like the appearance palette in Illustrator. And you can combine fills to do really complex things. But first I'm just going to click on this swatch here. You can see we have a color picker. Have our sort of hue, saturation, and lightness. Why don't we do a blue button? Everybody likes blue. At least I hope everybody likes blue. Or else you'll all write me and tell me, I don't like blue, Ryan. Well, I'm sorry. So that was pretty easy. We also have some predefined colors here. I believe this is Twitter's blue. You can see if I don't want to do a color, I can drop down and do a gradient instead. So really quick gradients. A nice little flip button. Also, radial gradients with your traditional radio control. And angular gradients with your traditional angular controls. Pretty cool. That's actually a little bit non-standard in comparison to some of the things you see. Switch it back to the blue one. Now you can see here I can hover over these gradients and I can actually click and add a color. And the way this works is once you select a color, you can come over here and pick exactly what color you want to fill it. Now if I wanted to take this color and say get rid of it, I can click on the color and just hit delete. So it's kind of very easy to add some colors, try some wacky stuff, and then delete the points. I do think there's a usability issue with having to go all the way over to this palette and not being able to, or at least from what I can tell, being able to pull this palette over and sort of have your controls closer, so you have to kind of keep going back and forth. But minor nuisance. You also have this noise option in which you can just go ahead and add a little bit of personality with some noise to your buttons. And you might think that looks pretty egregious, but keep in mind, if you look up here, we're at 200%, so this is what it looks like at 100%, much more normal. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that way down to almost non-existent. And you can see when I click off, it returns to our basic editor here. So there's our fill. We added one to it. Now, let's go and edit the border. So the border's inside. I want to make it outside right now. How big is it? This is again in pixels. I like 1. And the color here, we'll just pick a dark blue. And that looks fine to me. Maybe I'll go a little bit darker so I can see it on the bottom as well. And I'll hit back, and of course you have all your color options here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add a shadow. All this stuff would be done normally in a layer appearance, right? In Photoshop or in Effects and inside of Illustrator or the appearance palette. So click on shadow. You can see it adds a pretty nice default drop shadow. I like that. What I might do here in color is take the opacity down just so it's a little less harsh. I'll hit back here. And then I'm going to add an inner shadow too. Instead of this black inner shadow, I'm going to make it white. I'm going to dial up the opacity. It's going to be a little bit more intense. But this, I don't want it to be so blurry. So I'll knock it down to 1. And the Y of 1 is pretty good. What I may do is change from a white to a very light blue. That looks a little bit nicer. And you can bring the spread up, the spread down. Maybe I'll go to 2 with the Y. And when I zoom out, You can see I have this button with the highlight, and I'll go ahead and hide the grid. That's why I made it a button, so I can view it. Now what you're seeing here is all really smooth, right? It looks a lot like Illustrator. And what we've done is created this thing over here called Rectangle. We'll talk about that in a second, but it looks a lot like Illustrator. That's why there's this Show Pixels button that we checked out before. When I click on that, you can see this looks a lot more like a Photoshop object. And when we zoom in, we even get a pixel grid. But you can see everything has snapped perfectly to pixels. I don't have to worry about adjusting all my edges for, 20 minutes after I create a bunch of shapes, or constantly checking them to make sure everything's sitting on a pixel. Sketch sort of does it for you. God forbid, right? So in those particular things, it's like a godsend. Now I said it's a button, right? So let's click on text and add some text. It says type something. What a great instruction. How about Ryan's first button? Now, you saw something come up on the right, and we're going to get back to it, but by default, you have this kind of quick palette where you can choose a font, and it starts at Helvetica, not Myriad Pro or Arial. So for web design fans, hey, Helvetica's default. I can center align it here. But let's click on More, because this was the original palette. We have a visual font list here. You can see I have a ton of fonts. Let's choose Folio here. And now what I'm going to do is pick Folio Bold. So right down here is our font family. Here's a bunch of standard font sizes. Maybe I'll go 14. Our alignment, our text decoration. That's why it's called decoration. Text decoration is a CSS property. Underline is a possible decoration. Double underline. Strike through. Well, I'm going to go for no. And these things, again, it maps to CSS attributes. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. CSS exporting, but you can export CSS from this program, which is really cool. You can even go ahead and do things like line spacing. If you delete everything, it just goes to automatic. Character spacing. So if you've never used this before, I'll go ahead and you can see me turning up my brightness there by accident. Let's start with 5. I'll hit enter. So character spacing, you can see I get these controls. Here I can click it down. Or if I want, again, I can hold and drag. So if I wanted to adjust those, maybe tighten up the kerning. That looks cool. Nice and bold. Maybe I'll even go to 18 there. I'm feeling good about that. Of course, your color brings up that color picker. I'll choose white. I'll go back. And then you even have some paragraph spacing here as well. And then finally, you can save this as a style. So I can click plus here. It says it's a new style. I'll call it Bold Folio Button. So essentially, as you can see, it looks white, so it's very hard to tell that it's there. That's an interface quirk. Come on, Sketch team, fix it. But I can save that style, so when I go and type something again, whatever it happens to be, when I type it, I can go into More, choose this Folio button, and very quickly get my styles. So you can establish headline and type styles right away. There's a lot to talk about, but we'll cover some of these things a little bit slower and in more depth, but you're starting to get the sense of this. So I want to go ahead and end this lesson. We're going to just put on a shadow. Very quick and easy. Just clicked on shadow. I might bring that blur down a little bit. You can see I'm just dragging up and down. You can also make that a left and right drag. So basically, depending on what you like. The blur is 0. I'll bring down the opacity of Ryan's first button. And you can see, there's my button. Text layer, shape layer. Nothing special, but pretty cool. And if I zoom in and show you very quickly. I'll show the pixels. You can see the text is rendered exactly how it would be rendered inside of, say, a Safari browser or Chrome or really your web browsing defaults. I choose not to see the pixels by default for a lot of things until I'm finalizing a design. I'll go back to showing the grid. You can see another weird thing, right? The button is always hide grid, but it is hide and show the grid. Drag it around, position it, you can see it will snap and help you position everything just right. And if you mess up and something's out of alignment, it's going to be time to align something. Well, it's actually hard to find in the interface because it's so subtle, but there is a way to align stuff, and that's coming up next.